Thank you for staying with us. My name is Felicity Ezewike. Flooding and landslides in the Democratic Republic of Congo this week has so far killed at least 401 persons. Authorities there say a further 205 people were seriously injured in a flooding that was caused when rivers burst their banks following heavy rains on Thursday. 167 people are listed as missing. In several villages close to the shore of Lake Kivu, people have been digging through the mud with their hands in a desperate search for missing relatives. The Congolese Red Cross volunteers say they do not have body bags and are having to pile up the bodies wrapped in blankets in the villages of Bu-shu-shu and Nya-mu-kubi in South Kivu province. The figures are expected to rise. Now, President Felix Tshisekedi has declared a day of national mourning on Monday, and a team of his ministers are to travel to the region to coordinate humanitarian and disaster management. Whether they are already there, we don't yet know. Last month, a landslide provoked by torrential downpours killed around 20 people in North Kivu, a province that neighbors South Kivu. The last incident of a similar scale in the Congo occurred in October 2014 when heavy rainfall destroyed over 700 homes. More than 130 people were reported missing at the time. This is according to the United Nations. DR Congo remains one of the poorest countries in the world and is dealing with conflicts in its east between the Congolese army and the M23 rebels. Joining me for a conversation on this is Nixon Katembo. He's a public affairs analyst. He joins us from Johannesburg, South Africa. Thanks for giving us your time on the program.
Thanks for having me.
Okay, before we start, let's see if we can get maybe an update from what is happening at the moment, and that's from the administrator of Kalehe Territory, Thomas Bakenga.
Avec la vie, mais c'est qu'ici, ce n'est pas le cas. Nous voulons que nous rendre grâce au Seigneur qui a autorisé que cela se passe. Les rescapés ont une maladie de traumatisme. Ils sont trop traumatisés comme nous-mêmes ici. Et vous connaissez une personne traumatisée qui n'est pas accompagnée psychologiquement, c'est plus que la mort. Et quand l'autorité a décidé que la journée d'aujourd'hui soit décrétée une journée, d'observation de deuil national, c'est pour nous.
I was just reiterating the call for a day of national mourning. Heartbreaking pictures, actually, Katembo, coming out of DR Congo. Is there any update at the moment that you know about?
Well, at the moment, I know that rescue efforts are still going on in the area. Bodies are still recovering, and to my estimates, according to the information I received so far, the death toll is closing into almost 480 people. This is also in line with the earlier death toll number of 400 that was given, but also several other missing in the process, some of whom they don't know where they are, and some have been covered by mud from this flooding. So it's a daunting task on the part of the rescuer, particularly with the government of the DRC, given the fact that the region is still facing other challenges such as conflicts, proliferation of armed groups, but also the lack of key infrastructure in the area. I should mention also that the topographic landscape of the South Kivu region, particularly the Kalehe territory, is one of the hilly area, which is also prone to landslide and so on. So it's a very, very dire situation at the moment as the rescue efforts are continuing.
You say this area is hilly. Are there any conversations about making people leave that area to save their lives, or Because one wonders if the government is aware that this place is prone to landslides and flooding and the possibility that people will lose their life might come up, why hasn't action been taken before now? Could these deaths have been avoided?
Well, I think we have to go back to understand that the changing of the weather has greatly impacted on how these floodings affect the local populations. As to why the government is not intervening in terms of relocating the populations there, the answer is that these are people who have been living in this area for quite a number of years, if centuries, if I may say. So it's difficult to just tell people to move from their natural habitat without a proper engagement at the social and the community level, but also making sure that there is an alternative where people can continue with their lives similar to what they have been living in the current conditions where they are. And not only that, you understand that this is a region prone to conflict, but not only prone to conflict, but also facing conflicts. There are several armed groups that are in that particular province, the South Kivu, and you mentioned earlier the North Kivu province, which also battling other plagues such as the killings that are being perpetrated by the armed group, namely the M23. So it is at this point in time very difficult to even think of relocating the local
Okay, there's a part of my
However,
question, yeah.
The question, however, I think what can be done at this point is to look at the possibility of setting up the technological kind of advancement in terms of sending early warning systems in terms of meteorological predictions, so as to tell the population earlier about what are the possibility or what might come in the case of such a torrential rains that have just devastated the area. Because I understand that these torrential rains, they broke out in the middle of the night. And even for regions which are relatively peaceful, such as the country next door, in Burundi, the city of Bujumbura was flooded. Also, there are reports of several destructions of properties, but also some losses of lives. So tell you a magnitude of the weather patterns changes affecting the local populations.
Yeah, basically the question I wanted to ask you, you've answered about how this could be avoided in the future. I want to explore that a little further. It's not a question now, everybody knows that there is huge conflict in DR Congo, and there is a question of funds and availability of finance for such things. But is this move something you think the government is considering, advance warning, not only for South Kivu or North Kivu, but for areas that are prone to landslides and flooding?
Well, I think it will require a holistic approach in terms of just dealing with this particular one event of the floods. It goes beyond the structure of the states, how the state is organized, and how it is responding to the basic challenge of the communities, not only in this area that have been struck by floods, but also other areas which are struck by conflict. And you see that there has been a lull because there is no, in my view, a political will or even a strategic approach to deal with the conflicts, not only just conflict, but also natural disasters of this nature. So when you have a government that is incapacitated in that way, without a proper planning, without a proper strategic thinking towards what might happen tomorrow, these issues are likely to happen. And unfortunately for the Congo, a country that is in a perpetual war at the moment, cannot plan around these issues in the way I see things. Rather, more is directed towards a sort of a defense or even the control of armed group per se, not looking at unanticipated destruction of natural.
The DR Congo
Forest.
does seem to have a lot of challenges going on. The conflict there is making things a little difficult. How is this? A lot of persons have lost their homes. There are heartbreaking videos of a woman who's lost all her children, a man who's lost all his kids and his wife. Where are we? What do you know that's being done to help improve the humanitarian situation there and ensure that these people have at least food and water in the time that they are trying to get themselves together?
Yeah, through the various ministries, the government is saying that it is mobilizing resources to go to the rescue of those who survive in terms of providing them at least with alternative shelter, food, and clean water. But also, there has been a tendency from the part of the government of the DRC as well, in terms of relying on outside world for something that could have been planned for. And all this is a question of administrative procedures, is a question of administrative planning, as I said earlier. And when a country is in such a disarray of institutional framework, it becomes a bit difficult to even think of anticipating in planning to responding to natural disasters such as this. And that's where the problem lies with the case of the Congo.
Okay, let's look at it from another angle. You mentioned the international community. The UN spokesperson, deputy spokesperson for the Secretary General of the UN, before we started this conversation, during the news headline, actually acknowledged and said it's an acceleration of climate change. That is the impact that is being experienced in DRC. Do you agree with this assessment that climate change is also exacerbating the challenges we see in DRC? If yes, then how can international communities be pressured to, international community, I beg your pardon, be pressured to pay better attention to the relief efforts ongoing in DR Congo?
I think the international community can play so much. You would recall that the international community and different UN mechanism has been in the Congo for the past 20 years, first dealing with conflicts and now natural disasters. And you would see that there hasn't been much success registered in terms of its presence in the country. Adding to the natural disasters that are coming, I don't think that it can do that much. However, many pressures are applied on it to act. It's all about the question of political will on the part of the leadership within the DRC at the international community level to respond to these challenges with a genuine concern in resolving some of these issues or even dealing with some of these factors such as natural disasters. And that requires a peaceful and stable Congo to be able to deal with issues of this nature. In other words, a country at peace with itself. Without that, we will continue talking about either the help of the international community, either the lack thereof from both the international community and the Congolese government, unfortunately.
There are efforts ongoing to resolve the conflict, and I completely agree with you that in the face of conflict, there is no united front. It's impossible to get the kind of response from the international community that they would require. So exploring the connection between the conflict and the crisis of flood and displacement that we have at the moment, what would be a suggestion to the DR Congo government in the interim? Because people need aid to get access to some of these needs. We know that voluntary organizations are there, charity organizations are there, but how is the access to that area? What in your thinking can be done to enhance the participation of these voluntary organizations in improving the condition of people who find themselves with such a devastation?
I think we should understand this, that all of this happened in a state of lawlessness in that particular province and in a broader part of the Eastern DRC. Why this is very important? It is important because once you have a peaceful region and a peaceful government that is looking after the interests of the people, it becomes much more easier to plan for the country itself in terms of social, economic well-being, in terms of development, in terms of infrastructure development and capacity building at a community level and at a state level. Now, when you have this kind of abscess of this nature that the Congo is facing, I said earlier that perhaps the issues of early warning systems could apply here. Said that, look, there has been this on a meteorological side, and these are the warnings we want the people to move. And therefore, we could have saved more lives than what we saw happening this past weekend. However, given the state of lawlessness, the state of lack of direction within the country on the part of the government, given the many challenges of conflict that the country is facing, these are likely to happen. And unfortunately for the international community, no one seems to care about the Congo anymore, regardless of how many deaths are occurring, whether through natural disasters that have just witnessed. And in fact, just a few days ago, there were even people, over 147 people killed in neighboring province through the invasion by M23 in the camp of displaced people.
All right, let's see if we can. Sorry to interrupt you. I'm told we have very limited time, and I have two more questions for you. We're talking about how we can help mitigate the impact if we cannot stop it. One of them you suggested was advance warning for the people in that area. Besides that, what other advice would you give as a way of mitigating the impact of these floods when they do come, since it cannot be avoided?
Well, the natural disasters are going to be one of the difficult issues to deal with if the governments are not prepared to be dealing with those issues in the first place. And as I said, the government can only prepare if there is stable administration of framework to deal with such a natural disaster. Unfortunately, for this particular region and the broader Eastern DRC, we see more conflicts, and therefore the effectiveness of government to render service to the people still a challenge.
Okay, so there has to be some reconciliation, dialogue, peace for any effective mitigation effort to really come to pass. Let's just wrap things up with this question for you, and that has to do with, from your point of view, what recommendations would you give for individuals and organizations? Because at this stage, it seems the people are at the mercy of charity organizations like the Red Cross and others. So what advice would you give to other organizations interested in supporting the DR Congo disaster risk reduction efforts related to the floods and landslides?
I think my advice to organizations to look first, send relief directly to the affected community, but the most important is to stop the war altogether in the DRC, to allow the community to thrive, to allow the community to have a sense of peace that can give them a path to social and economic development. And once that is done, I think the rest can come, such as implementing strategy for early warning systems to warn the people against floods or any other things that might occur. Without that, without a stable political environment in the country, there is nothing can happen. Otherwise, we'll be talking about helping hands, whereas the community themselves can do this if they were
together
in a stable environment.
All right, Mr. Katembo, Nixon Katembo, thank you very much for joining us on VSA and sharing your thoughts on the situation in DR Congo.
Thank you for having me.
Up next on the program, we'll be looking at the IMF report on how effective implementation and reforms of the African Free Trade Agreement can boost growth across the continent. Please stay with us.